So our first person today, Dr. Sarah Noel, is an associate professor of watershed sciences at Utah State University. She has a PhD and master's degree in geography from UC Davis and a bachelor's degree in international economics from UCLA. Her expertise is environmental water management using systems modeling, mathematical modeling, and field studies. Recent research includes improving aquatic habitat objectives in water resource systems models and evaluating trade-offs between human and environmental water uses with uncertainty. Sarah has long loved saline lakes. I love that you've loved saline lakes forever. She pursued graduate school after working many summers as a naturalist at Mono Lake in California. Recent Great Salt Lake research includes modeling salt balance between the north and south arms, using a water balance to estimate lake level without human water demands, estimating costs of water conservation and water markets to provide environmental flows to the lake, and assessing water uses and infrastructure that threaten lake ecosystems. Null also works in other saline lake systems, including the Walker Basin in Nevada, Urmia Lake in Iran. And when not working, Sarah loves skiing, eating tacos, traveling, and spending time with her family. So join us, Sarah, and I will shut up and you can take over.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. This is really fun. I'm excited to be here. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and make sure that we can all see that. And that's not the right slide. Let's get on the beginning. Can everyone see that? Nods, at least by the panelists. Okay,
yeah,
good.
I can see it.
Okay, thank you. So yes, I have a little bit of a love affair with saline lakes. And when I first interviewed at Utah State University, that was the first thing I thought was, oh, great, Great Salt Lake is out there. So that'll be a nice reason for me to continue working on Great Salt Lakes. So today I'm going to be talking about water development, consumptive water uses, and the Great Salt Lake. And this is a chapter for the book that I did with Weinwert Spa. Okay, so starting with lake elevation, Great Salt Lake reached its lowest elevation in 2016. And so this plot on the left is showing time on the x-axis and lake elevation meters on the y-axis. And this is a weighted mean elevation for both the north and south arms. So we put it all together to get a total lake elevation. So 2016 was the lowest. We've had a couple ties for the wettest years, 1986, and then in the late 1800s. And then looking over here at the map at the right, especially at the lake over here, this blue portion of the lake is at its lowest extent. So that's the lowest area when in 2016. And then this kind of sandy color is the highest water extent. So you can see in 2016, the bays were dry. The lake was about half of its area. And so there were really big changes. And so our first question was, why is Great Salt Lake so low? What's going on? Is this from climate variability? Is this water demands? What's really happening here? And then the next thing I'm going to talk about in this talk today is what happened to the water that once used to reach the Great Salt Lake. So we're going to talk a little bit about consumptive water uses. So that means water that people use that do not come back to the lake. So it could be things like plant evapotranspiration. It could be water demands for cities or industry. It could be wetland plants. All of those we would say are consumptive water uses. Talk a little bit about water development and some effects on the biology. And then we're going to talk about potential solutions to stabilize Great Salt Lake level and biology. So the first thing we did, and this goes back to a previous paper that Wayne first authored. And so the first thing we did was look at stream flows through time. And so this figure here is showing actual observed stream flows in Blacksmith Fork in black, and the Bear River flows that were reconstructed from tree ring estimates. And so those are estimates, and you can see that the two correlate very well together. And they're, but overall, another thing that I'd like you to notice is, one, there's a lot of variability, but that trend line is not going down. So what we can say from this is, from the past, we wouldn't expect Great Salt Lake to have declined if precipitation and stream flow have not declined. So this isn't talking about the future. Future climate change. This is only looking at the past. So then we looked at people. What sort of water are people using? So these plots here on the left have, again, time on the left axis. The bottom plot is showing lake elevation, and the top plot is showing water use. So let's start with the top plot. This is showing water use through time. And so you could see that from the time that Utah was pioneered, there was a lot of agriculture, and that started using more and more water. Again, and we're talking about consumptive water uses, so not necessarily, flood irrigation where some of that water eventually might make its way back to the Great Salt Lake or back to rivers. But over time, starting in about the 1900s, we see other water uses really start to pop up. So for example, we see urban or municipal water uses, wetland uses, solar ponds, all of those are using water. So then we used a water balance, and this was led, this was led again by Wayne Wurtzbach. And so we took the observed lake level of Great Salt Lake, and that's here in red on the bottom line. And then we modeled what would happen if we didn't have all of these consumptive water uses. And from that, we got this green line. And again, you could see that there's natural variability. We would expect that in terminal lakes, which integrate climate and water use, but there's really no trend line. There's no, the lake hasn't just been dropping over the last few decades. So this told us, okay, the Great Salt Lake level is declining, and consumptive water uses are really the culprit. So who uses the water? And I already gave you a good hint to this in the last figure. This is showing it in another way, but really all of us. So agriculture uses the most right now, but urban and industrial uses use a good portion. Mineral extraction uses a good portion. Wetlands and reservoir evaporation is a little bit less. But interestingly, in the future, we would expect urban and industrial uses to start using a greater percentage of that water, and probably agricultural water uses to drop off, as usually as water becomes more scarce, some water is moved over from the agricultural sector to the urban sector. So that's a change we would anticipate in the future. So along with consumptive water uses that have increased over the past century, or a little bit over a century, we have built a good deal of water infrastructure in Utah. And so the map on the right is showing major reservoirs, whether they're colored by federal, private, and state ownership. The plot on the right is showing time on the left axis, reservoir capacity on the y-axis, and that's showing this ever-increasing reservoir capacity that mostly ended after 1985, although the future of that is in question, and I'll talk about that a bit more later. And then one more thing on this map that I'd like to point out is right here along the Wasatch Front, most of these valleys used to be agricultural, and right now we expect the population of Utah to double by about 2016. And so we would expect these urban areas that are primarily along the Wasatch Front to the water demands to keep increasing there. So one of the solutions, or one of the proposed solutions to meet that demand, is a new reservoir on the Bear River, or in the Bear River watershed. This goes back to the Bear River Development Act in 1999 that stipulates that 220,000 acre-feet of surface water should be developed. This kind of map, pictures on the right, is showing it's over a map, if you can kind of see that. And these are pictures of the 6 shortlisted locations where a dam could be built now. Some of them are up in the mountains, like right down here along Temple Fork. Some of them are off-site storage, like this one right in here in Whites Valley. And some of them, this one right here, would butt up right against Willard Bay. So there's a huge variability in where these proposed reservoirs might be located. The estimated cost is $1.5 billion. That, by the way, is lower than other similar dams that have been proposed in California and some other places. So that cost is certainly an estimate. And then modeling suggests that if 220,000 acre-feet of surface water were developed, it would reduce Great Salt Lake by another 5.5 feet. And again, that's vertical feet. It's not distance on land. That's 5.5 vertical feet, and this is a shallow lake, so that would look like a very long way on the surface of the land. So yesterday, or 2 weeks ago, I was giving a talk about humans and impacts of water diversions on Great Salt Lake levels. And my last two bullets here got smushed together. And so I want to go over this and correct it. It's always really hard to pull back misinformation once it gets out there, and I never want to be the person to do it. So I was talking about the Bear River Development Act. It was passed in 1999 to develop 220,000 acre feet of surface water. If a new reservoir is built, it's estimated to cost maybe about $1.5 billion. And here's the important part where I made a mistake. If that reservoir is built, we anticipate that Great Salt Lake's level will drop by about 8.5 inches. And 2 weeks ago, I smushed it with this lower bullet saying that if all the water in the whole compact was developed, then we would expect Great Salt Lake level to decline by about 5.5 feet. And those are all modeling estimates, and I kind of gave my talk and got going on autopilot, and I didn't even realize until the next day. And so this is my correction for that mistake. And now the next point I want to make is that Utahns use a lot of water. So this figure on the left is from our chapter, and this is showing Utah over here, the cubic meters per person per year that Utahns used, and this is compared to other Mediterranean and semi-arid locations. And so you can see that Utah's really an outlier, right? We use quite a bit of water. And then if there's people in the audience thinking, well, I don't really think about the water use of Israel and Spain and Italy, but maybe you know other states quite well. This map on the right is showing water use by state. And so the colors are showing current water use. Utah's actually has the second highest per capita water use if you look at public water supplies. So it's in this really high, Idaho is the first, it's in this very high area of per person water demand. And then these percentages are the changes that are estimated in the future. So one of the things that I did with Eric Edwards was we wanted to think about how much it would cost if we weren't to build a reservoir, but instead really target water conservation. So anytime, as a person who studies environmental water management, anytime I see places with very high per person water use, I usually think water conservation is the cheapest way to spread our water further. There's usually very low hanging fruit there. So we wanted to say, okay, if we wanted to allocate more water to Great Salt Lake, so we started by saying, what if we stipulated that we are going to allocate 20% more streamflow to Great Salt Lake, and we made water users cut back on their water. So we made them conserve water. What would be the cost of that? And so in this plot in here, we're looking at these numbers here, 20% increase to Great Salt Lake, and this is looking at costs of water conservation. And we found that just by stipulating 20% cutback of water for everyone would cost one-time cost of about $37.4 million. So you can see right there, it's a much cheaper alternative. But that's not really the end of this, I would say, solution or strategy, because some of you guys might have heard of cap and trade type of solutions. Like we use them a lot for air pollution. So we wanted to say, what if we apply cap and trade to water conservation? So that's saying some people that could conserve more easily could conserve more than 20% and sell their water, and other people that maybe it's hard for them to conserve could purchase that water, so they wouldn't have to conserve at all. And so that's what we mean when this says interbasin trading and interbasin trading. That means you could trade water within a specific watershed, the Bear, the Weber, or the Jordan watershed, or you could trade water throughout the whole Wasatch Front. And the larger area, as soon as we have interbasin trading, that's where we get really these cheapest costs associated. Really, that would make it easier for people too, because again, people or industries or cities that can conserve most easily would do that and be able to sell some of their water. So overall, we found that this could cost anywhere, conservation could cost anywhere between $14 million to $96 million. You could see these different bars here, depending on how it's really done, whether, you know, we stipulate water conservation or whether we allow a lot of flexibility with water marketing. So then another thing that Wayne and I did for this chapter is we wanted to look at other saline lakes and think about what are other saline lakes doing to restore their systems. We're not the only saline lake that has had water levels drop in, you know, over the past many decades. So we looked at a couple different alternatives. This isn't necessarily meant to be all inclusive, but to give us an idea of what other places are doing. So some places like Mona Lake, that's where I got interested in saline lakes, the lawsuits were really used to sue water users, to sue the city of LA and bring some water back to Mona Lake. Places like Walker Lake in Nevada are doing environmental water purchases. So this is most often implemented by nonprofits. And so nonprofits purchase water and then they dedicate it to in-stream uses. Sometimes there's interbasin water transfers. This is very common in Jordan and Israel and Palestine. These, though, more recent research has shown that these appear to be band-aids. They appear to be solutions that might help in the near term, but in the longer term, they don't necessarily change behaviors of water uses. Some places are diking lakes to basically make them smaller. So they're saying we're never going to restore this whole lake, but what we can do is dike it and make it a smaller lake where we can maintain some ecosystems and some ecosystem functions. And then finally, there's some places that really are just mitigating problems now. And so Owens Lake and Salton Sea, both in California, are places where they're not necessarily trying to restore the lake as it was, but they're trying to maybe stop dust and stop some species from dying. Now, one more thing that we realized when we were doing this is it's always cheaper to preserve saline lakes at the outset than it is to restore them later. And this, I don't think, is unique to saline lakes. I would say this is how restoration goes. But to give you a couple examples, at Owens Lake, which I just talked about, so far mitigating only for airborne dust has cost over $1 billion, and the costs are estimated to exceed $3.6 billion over the next 25 years. So those costs vastly outweigh the value of that water in the first place. So saline lakes are very valuable. And then water purchases at Walker Lake have cost about $57 million as of 2016. So again, significant cost to try to restore these systems. And now I know I've talked a lot about water demands, consumptive water uses, some about economics, a little bit about economics. And so for those of you guys who are going, hey, you know, I'm really interested in the biology, why aren't we talking about that more? Remember that lake level affects the biology. And so here I have a portion of the relationships between Great Salt Lake level and some biological parameters. This is from data from Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, which made really a nice kind of stoplight, green, yellow, blue, of where are healthy lake levels and where are not healthy lake levels. And I've represented a few of them here. So in this figure, green is desirable lake levels for things like South Arm salinity, brine shrimp, grebes, phytoplankton and bay habitats, bacteria diversity, white pelicans for jamie, and island land bridges, wetlands, and dust. And so you could see that there's really not, you know, very straightforward solutions. These are complex problems that we're dealing with. But we do know that when all of these different biological parameters get really low, they all are threatened. And with that, I'm happy to, well, probably questions will come at the end. So here is the contact information for Wayne and for I. And then I think probably I turn this back over to Jamie in the next talks and wait for the panel at the end.